Hey, everybody, welcome to the ProgCast. I am Gregg Bendian, your happy host, and always interested in bringing you new stuff or stuff that you might not be familiar with, as well as the classic. And today is no exception. Today, Tim Seisser from the District 97 band, one of my favorite progressive bands out of Chicago, is here, and he's got a cool new album, which we're going to talk about with TS3. His trio with Andrew Lawrence, who's actually the keyboardist from District, and Jonathan Marks on drums, with some very cool special guests. Donnie McCaslin's playing saxophone on it. Fried Haag is playing guitar. Howard Levy is playing harmonica.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim Lefebvre, who produced the album, is also performing on bass on the album. So this is quite a cool thing. So I want to say welcome, Tim. Hi, how are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you for asking me to be a part of this. I'm always happy to talk music with other musicians. So this is great.
That's what we do. We talk about music, we talk about inspiration, talk about influences, talk about what's going on in the world of music. Because our world is sort of a interesting little world, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. It's especially as of late, it's been particularly challenging to navigate and make sense of the madness. So,
So true. On top of it all, Tim and I were on Cruise to the Edge
you know,
about a week ago, or was it more? I
it
don't know.
feels like a lifetime ago.
I know. Quote. And
Right.
what is that? What is the official reference?
Right.
Reference mark. So yeah, and that was crazy being around all that progressive music, and I had the great pleasure of hearing District 97 perform twice,
Nice.
and you guys really you hit it out of the park. It's a very impressive live band. I'd never seen you guys live, only seen videos of live stuff,
Cool.
and I like the heft. I like the power that you're bringing to the band because I was aware of the band before you were bass player in
Mm-hmm.
the band, and you've brought a certain amount of I would say power to the group on the low end that maybe didn't exist there before.
Yeah, I remember when Pat. So I was a fan of the band before I actually became a part of the band, um, and Patrick is a friend and fellow bass player. We were kind of on the same gigs outside of District 97 in Chicago. We would like refer each other and sub for each other a lot, but you never see guys who are your same instrument that much, especially being a bass player. We don't play multiple bass players on a gig like ever. But when I found out that he was going to be leaving the group, um, what I heard was kind of like who's gonna rock the hardest or who's gonna have like the heaviest sound because uh, there's a lot of great jazz players in town and there's a lot of great guys who have chops to handle the intricacies of the music, but there's also like sometimes a lot of those guys don't understand like you said, like the beefiness, the sort of like rock mentality of like your sound and how it should sound. And if you don't check out a lot of like progressive music, metal, rock music, if you don't actually listen to that stuff, you can be a great player and have all the facility, but not like have the right sound. Similar to any other scene, similar to being an R&B bass player, you can have all the chops and be able to do all the slap stuff, but if you're playing with like a Rickenbacker with a pick, people are going to be like, yeah, you're good, but like that's not the sound. That's
There's a
not.
certain vernacular.
Yeah. So and then it was kind of understood that it was like when Patrick said he was leaving, it was like who's going to replace him, and the consensus was it's Tim. Like there was I don't think, from what I've been told, there was never any question. It was like I was the guy to get the first call to fill the chair. And I think that was because I had familiarity with everyone in the band through the scene, but also because of the type of music that people knew that I played and was into. It kind of, I think it was like, yeah, he's the one that you should ask to do it. So I was super geeked out when Jonathan called me and told me, like, here's the deal, we want you to do it. And technically I auditioned, but I don't think I needed to be honest. So
No, clearly, you were the right guy to come in and play the big instrument, uh, deal with sound. I mean, I like when I'm listening to this kind of rock music. I do at certain points need to hear fuzz bass.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like you
I
said, I mean,
need
it's
it.
part of the vernacular,
Yeah,
it's part of it's, you should have that sound. So,
yeah, yeah. I like me some lead bass. You know,
as do I.
when the time comes for it, that it must occur.
Yep. Yeah. And people are always like, oh man, you were ripping. It's like, I get one shot. So I got to make it count. I got to swing for the fences. That's been part of the challenge of having that feature is, just developing it, doing something differently and really just kind of like filling that role of like soloist and really trying to make an impression since it's kind of like you get one shot, buddy. So,
Well, you get a lot of shots because you're definitely bringing so much music to the bottom end of districts music, and I like the fact that the best bass players have the full range of the instrument, but they also have a certain amount of taste and tastefulness that has to go in how they play. I mean, as a composer, as a drummer myself, I'm very aware of what bass players are doing what.
mm,
So when I hear bass players like Jimmy Johnson, I just
mm-hmm,
I can't can barely contain myself because it's just so much music
mm-hmm.
and it's coming out in such a profound way, almost like fully formed, as if you would think it was composed every little thing that he does.
Right.
Who were some of the bass players that excited you coming up?
I mean, I was my bass nerdum took sort of a logical progression. I was super into Cliff Burton when I started because I was listening to Metallica and Nirvana and Pearl Jam and all the kind of grunge bands. So when I
Soundgarden.
heard, pardon me,
Soundgarden.
yeah, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, like all the good stuff. That's kind of what I grew up on. But also, I was always into more metal stuff too. I used to love listening to like Death. Fear Factory was another band I listened to a lot. But it was sort of like it started with Cliff Burton, hearing him do Anesthesia solo bass on Kill 'Em All. I was just like, whoa, the bass can do that, and that's kind of where my interest in more expressive bass playing kind of started. Was like, oh wow, this is cool. Then obviously, like, I got super into Primus, Les Claypool, and then from there I kind of got into more of the progressive rock because as I started to get more facility on the bass, I started to get my ear started to get interested in more complex music. So I heard Dream Theater and was just like, whoa, what is this? This is a whole nother thing. And my dad is an avid music listener but not a musician, and so he had an insane CD collection of everything from like Donald Byrd and John Coltrane to Miles Davis to Pat Metheny group to, I remember finding the Jocko tape, the first Jocko tape, and playing that, and just that totally blew my mind. I'd always heard about Jocko because I read Bass Player magazine back when you get a subscription and you get an issue once a month. I had just a massive stack of them. And I'd always be like hearing about, you got to check out Jocko, other bass players that I like talking about Jocko. So when I finally stumbled across that tape, I was like, I should listen to this. And that was the beginning of the end. As soon as I heard that, it was over. All I wanted to do after that was like play bass and learn how to play like Jocko. So, but I also got super into Victor Wooten. Um, there's a solo bassist called Michael Manring. He was big in the Windham Hill catalog stuff, but I think my dad had a Windham Hill Christmas album, and I heard this God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, Michael Manring just playing it solo, and I was like, whoa, now what is this all about? And so then I went way down the rabbit hole with that, and then from there on in high school into like my early college years, my just curiosity in music exploded. So I worked at a library for a little bit, and I would just like take home 10 CDs a day every day and just burn them, all of them. And then most of it I would listen to. And it's like, if I liked it, cool. If not, I just wouldn't listen to it again. So, like John Cage and like, Philip Glass, that kind of stuff. And then getting into just Dave Holland Quintet. First time I heard Dave Holland Quintet, my mind was just thoroughly blown. I saw them live like 10 or 12 times. So it was just kind of like that age of consumption. My brain just wanted to discover new music. So I try to still kind of have that mentality even at this point in life. But it's a little harder, in my opinion, nowadays to like be as hungry to discover, just because a lot of times I'm just like, I need to give my ears a break because I'm playing so much and listening to so much just through doing it professionally.
Yeah, I think there's input and there's output, and then also I have to give credit to Andy Partridge, who said there's also stasis or off,
Mm,
in the
yeah,
process. And you hit that point in your early musical life where you're just consuming everything, and who knows what even's going on. I often think about the sequence of what you hear, because it's not like I heard Miles and Coltrane before I heard Mahavishnu.
right,
It's hearing Mahavishnu and there's a tune called Miles Beyond, and you say, who's Miles Davis? I should listen
right,
to him. And then you find out, McLaughlin played with Miles, and then you find out that McLaughlin did an album of Coltrane tunes with Santana, and who's
yeah,
Coltrane? So I often think about that. It's like when stuff goes in, and then what the frame of reference is, and how you end up synthesizing that, how you end up processing that. It's bizarre.
yeah. Yeah, I always tell people, I think the reason my musical brain is the way that it is that I I grew up with the musical background of like my childhood was like classical music and jazz music. And like some of my earliest musical memories are like hearing Last Train Home by Pat Metheny Group. Like we just called it the choo choo song. Like this, we were young and it sounded like a train. And so it was like, oh, or like hearing classical music on the radio in the morning at breakfast and just like hearing it in the car on the way to school. So like weird music, non-vocal sort of like music to the general public that's like odd. That was just sort of normal. And then in addition to that, the standard radio and tapes and like stuff when I was in junior high, like the bands that I mentioned before. But uh just having sort of a tolerance and an ear for stuff from an early age. So many musicians that I know that are just like the most exceptional musicians are like grew up in musical households. So in a sense it's odd that I did not grow up with any musicians in the family, but I grew up with music, like odd music or music that when musicians would listen to in the background. So I think it kind of trained my ear to be welcoming to that kind of stuff, to weird stuff and dissonance and non-vocal stuff. So
I know very much of what you speak because that was the same thing in my household.
mm,
My dad was just the biggest music fan, not a musician.
mm-hmm,
Couldn't carry a tune, really. But he just had this collection. It had all that stuff you're talking about, the classical, the contemporary jazz, the Count Basie with Sinatra and the Quincy Jones
yeah,
arrangements.
yeah,
He took me to see Kenton before Kenton passed. I got to see Kenton. He took me to see Ravi Shankar Ali Raka really
mm-hmm,
early. So it's it's interesting because when you have a household where there isn't music making going on, but there's music of all those varieties playing in the background or in the foreground.
mm-hmm,
And then now I've passed that tradition on to my son who's 21 now, and he grew up just hearing everything.
mm-hmm,
So you see what it does. It's true. Like you started listening to all that stuff that your dad was into, but then the music of your time was Metallica
mm-hmm.
and the Seattle bands, and that spoke to you, but you already had that 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 primer that your dad gave you with all that music beforehand. So you were
Yeah,
really prepared for anything at that point.
yeah, and it was like you said, it was, I didn't just like come in on Coltrane and be like, this is it. It was like I was into the bands that my peers were into. I started playing music like that in a rock band when I was younger. And was it still like, oh, so you should also do jazz band because that's the academic thing to do when you're that age and take lessons. And my teacher was teaching me little classical etudes and stuff on the bass because he was a classical guitarist by
Now, is
trade.
this upright or electric?
Electric, yeah, yeah. So I didn't really ever. I got into upright in high school as a matter of necessity. My band director was like, could tell that I was serious about music and about jazz. When I was about a sophomore, he was leaving and a new director was coming in, and I remember he pulled me aside and said, if you want to play jazz professionally, you need to start to play the upright bass. So I taught myself how to play it. I didn't really ever take any lessons. I wouldn't play in the orchestra because I had zero bow technique. They were trying to get me in it, but I was actually in the percussion ensemble. That's kind of how that was my ensemble that I was doing in addition to jazz band. So, and I had a cushy situation with that. I could kind of just like go in a practice room and do electric bass work. And they let me do that because they knew I was in there working on stuff. So, but yeah, I played upright in my early years in the city. I didn't go to college. I went to junior college for a year and then I dropped out. And I just decided to just move to the city as soon as I could and start just like hitting the pavement, trying to go to sessions, trying to network, just trying to play with people. So I did play upright in those days, but eventually I gave up the upright just because it was never really my voice. And I mean, it is very difficult to be proficient on both instruments. I think a lot of people don't realize truly how much work goes into keeping your chops together, to where you can comfortably sort of just jump between the two instruments.
I mean, honestly, even between acoustic guitar and electric guitar.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of people are like, well, they're you should double, but I've always said it's kind of like functionally it's the same instrument, but like practically as far as physically playing it goes, it's like playing the tuba and playing the trumpet. Like they both have valves and it's like they're both, you blow into both of them, but like the chops and physically what goes into playing them, it's like it's not the same instrument at all. There's no similar muscle memory between this and between this. It's completely different. Everything is in a different place. The types of muscles that you use are totally different. So I was also having like some physical issues from playing it because I never learned how to play it properly physically. And so that kind of helped facilitate my decision to just switch over to exclusively playing electric bass.
You can
So
hurt yourself.
yeah, and a lot of guys do, you know. But it was difficult in the short term. I lost a lot of work at that time when I gave up the upright. There was a lot of gigs where people called and it was like, are you free to do this? And I was like, yeah, but just so you know, I don't play upright anymore. And they'd be like, well, I'm sorry, it has to be upright. And a lot of times it was just because that's what the client wanted, or visually that's what they wanted, or sort of like aesthetically it had to be that. Um, but one thing I've always sort of prided myself on is being able to play electric bass in a traditional jazz setting and still have it swing and feel right. And I get that compliment from other musicians, and that is one of the more meaningful ones because it's like the electric bass also sonically has absolutely nothing to do with the upright bass. So if you can approximate it in a way to where people are like, oh, this feels good, this is still swinging, this is still like comfortable to play over, that's kind of speaks more to the overall, like, if you're good at music, it kind of doesn't matter what instrument. Tell Bela Fleck he can't play straight ahead jazz on a banjo. It's like, there's so many. It's like tell John McLaughlin he can't play Indian music on an acoustic guitar. It's just like,
Or an electric guitar.
or an electric, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like it doesn't. You know,
Yeah.
it's
No, you
it's
make a
one.
good point. Very
Yeah,
true. I mean, tell Shiv Kumar Sharma you can't play a dulcimer, hammered dulcimer in Indian
right.
music, and see
Yeah,
what happens. Tell Srinivas that you can't have electric mandolin in Indian classical music.
yeah, just
So
ripping.
yeah, it's very important, and I feel that way as some of my listeners will know about the vibraphone, which is sort of my second home,
Mm.
and making something happen with those keys and just approaching it from a completely harmonic or linear point of view rather than the drums, which can be linear and harmonic, but also just are typically more about rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's good to take yourself out of those situations and put yourself back in a way. So spend time away from, say, fretless. Do you go back and forth between fretless and fretted?
I mean, I exclusively played fretless bass for like 5 years when I was younger. And I only stopped because when I started playing professionally in Chicago, I started getting gigs and people were like, dude, you got it. You got to get a fretted bass. Like this, you sound great, but this is not the right sound at all for like what we're doing. So I only stopped playing fretless bass because I felt like to play more of the gigs that I wanted to play, I needed to get a 5-string electric bass. So I've always had a soft spot for fretless basses. And yeah, I will gladly play fretless bass whenever it is called upon, but it just comes up so rarely as a necessity. So it's more of
Well, let
just
me
like,
ask you this: as far as fretless bass in progressive rock music, I think of guys like Mick Karn from
mm-hmm,
the group Japan, or even Colin Moulding from XTC.
mm-hmm.
Did you check that stuff out as far as fretless in rock bands?
I mean, I did check out Mick Karn. I also like recently have gotten into a lot of like the 80s Pino Palladino. He did a lot of fretless, like with the Don Henley stuff. Um, and then obviously Jocko. One of my other just all-time favorite bass players is Gary Willis from Tribal Tech. I mean, he is the only other person that I would put up there with Jocko who is like a fretless only player who like legitimately took the fretless bass and just completely made it his bitch. So I mean, his technique is just absolutely mind blowing. The way he approaches the instrument, his facility, his vocabulary. So, yeah, and like I mentioned before, Michael Mannering, like he does most of his stuff is on a fretless bass. So it's like it just was always had it was a sound that I was always from Jocko on. I mean, even like a lot of people don't realize it, but Victor Wooten is like one of the most amazing fretless bass players as well. You don't think of him playing fretless bass because so much of what he does is the thumping and his sort of like his bag.
Mm.
But I did a bunch of transcriptions of his from Bela Fleck and his solo stuff where it's just him on fretless, and it's like his fretless sound and his approach is pretty amazing as well. So
That's really interesting. Yeah, because I remember there was a time when people didn't want fretless because it was too much like Jocko.
right. I mean, I went through that myself.
Mhm.
Like I remember a lot of people being like, man, you sound like Jocko. Man, you sound like Jocko. Man, you sound like Jocko. And it's like the ultimate compliment to even be put in the same place as him sonically. But it was also just like, I probably should like start to try to kind of do my own thing because I don't want to just be another Jocko clone.
Mhm.
So, but I was a little like I'm younger than a lot of the guys that were in that the sort of the time when like you would get ragged on hardcore for sounding like Jocko. You know, by the time I kind of came up, it had that sort of anti-Jocko, anti-fretless movement had sort of started to chill out a little bit. So there was a little more space for me to do it. But I talked to like older bass players, you know, about what the scene was like more in the mid 80s, you know, when
A great
everybody
cleansing.
yeah, it's like they were like everybody would be showing up with a fretless bass and doing the Jocko thing. Like everybody wanted to
And
do
then
it.
everybody wanted to get rid of it.
Right. And then everybody moved to like the Marcus Miller sort of like slap that became hotter. Like that sound in the late 80s and early 90s became more of like the desired sort of thing. You know, so it's, but yeah, I mean,
How
there's
old
so
are
many.
you now?
I'm 38. I'm about to turn 39. So,
Okay.
but yeah, I kind of decided, you know, it's like I need to kind of get away from that fretless only world a little bit just for fear of just being, you know, just being lumped in with as another Jocko clone.
So talk to me about what you're bringing to district because I'm interested in the process of writing in that band
Yeah.
and who contributes what, and are the more riff based things coming from Jim, or are the harmonic things coming from everybody? Tell me about your part in that.
So the process for me has been interesting being a newcomer to the band. So like the initial onboarding phase of me and Andrew getting into District 97 was literally just learning in vaults and because that had just kind of just been released. So it was that and then picking up some of the previous material from Trouble with Machines and Hybrid Child. So uh it was also, that was sort of still in the Wetton era a little bit. So it was also like learn these King Crimson tunes because eventually we're going to play these with Wetton again. So it was a lot of just like upfront time and investment and just like learning this really difficult music and trying to make it sound like me. But, you know, I was learning Patrick's bass lines, I was doing Patrick's parts. So when the opportunity, when like the initial onboarding was done and we did a couple tours, I immediately came to the table with a song that I had sort of been working on uh, for me and Jonathan. We had like a duo project. And I was like, you know, maybe I should try to like flesh this out for D97 because it wasn't done yet. So I just came in with like some riffs and some a loose form, some like harmony ideas and melody. And then I just kind of like opened it up to the group and was like, what do you guys think we should do with this? So we worked it out. It was very time consuming. Um, and then, you know, the next tune that was brought in was a Jonathan tune. And he usually, because he's written for the band much more than I have, he had sort of it more kind of like organized and ready to go with like melodies, vocals, form. And then the next tune that I brought, I was kind of settled into the process a little bit more. And it was essentially like I came in with like a form and like, you know, harmony and some melodies, and then gave it to Leslie and was like, what do you think? What do you, because I was always really bad at writing lyrics. So from the beginning of when I started writing for the band, I always left lyrical and melodic ideas up to Leslie to sort of tweak or come up with her own stuff that fits kind of with the harmony and the rhythmic ideas and the riff ideas. So but yeah, now it's kind of, it's different in the sense that during the shutdown I did a ton of writing because I had a ton of time. And I was writing more complete stuff. So the song that we played, that we closed our pool set out with, called Deck is Stacked, I wrote that from everything, lyrics, melodies, all the riffs, all that from start to finish. So that's the first one that I've written for the band where it was like, this is the song. And it really was unchanged. But previous iterations of like songs that I would bring in, I would just sort of bring in some ideas. And as time went on, I got more comfortable writing for the band. I felt more comfortable bringing in more complete ideas and less just like, let's figure this out together.
I'm so glad you mentioned lyrics because I'm always interested in what progressive musicians want to say with their lyrics. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
I mean, the one of the trends with screens, with, you know, the content that we were focusing on had a lot to do with just like the political discourse at the time, and also just like the societal discourse, like things that we saw that we felt were like problems with society and the way humans treat each other. So like Sheep is all about cell phone addiction. Shapeshifter is sort of about knowing someone and then they kind of like, you know, change up on you. uh but you know, District 97 is unique in the sense that also like a lot of Jonathan's tunes are like, he embraces more of like the prog storytelling sort of aspect. So there are songs like Ghost Girl and Perfect Young Man where, you know, and a lot of the Hybrid Child alien abduction stuff, you know, it's like he tends to write a certain way. Jim tends to write in a completely different way as well. Like a lot of Jim's material, uh, Jim is like more of a pure songwriter, and he definitely, you know, with his own projects and with District 97, oftentimes comes in with just like, done, here it is, here's the song, because he's a very accomplished lyricist and songwriter in his own right. So Jim is kind of like, he writes the hits. He just kind of comes in and quietly is like, here's one of my tunes, and then everybody's like, that's the best tune on the album. So, or like, you know, it's usually tunes that speak to people. But uh you know, the Deck is Stacked is really just about being in a weird touring rock band and what the experience is like, just being in a business where you have fans and musicians coming up to you and being like, you guys are the most amazing band I've ever seen. Like, I don't even know what to describe you as. I don't know how to like what to call you, but it's awesome. And then a business that just doesn't give two shits about you at all because you play weird genre, obscure, sort of like niche market music. So it's just, it was kind of like a vent. It was kind of a song where I wanted to vent a little bit about what it's like Uh, and I was just, I've been listening to a lot of like classic rock, and I kind of wanted to just try to write a song that was a little less like prog nerdy and a little bit more kind of just like riff rock, but still fit it within the District 97 sound.
Well, who wrote Takeover?
Takeover was written by Jonathan. Um, and I remember him saying, when we were learning it, that he was just kind of trying to write like a Zeppelin style, like,
Yeah.
trashy, kind of riffy thing. I won't go too much into the lyrical content of that one, but that was definitely, I feel like, to me, the songs in the District 97 catalog that speak to me the most are the ones that are about more of like a real life sort of like valid to my life experience stuff compared to like more of the storytelling stuff. I understand why people like that sort of like storytelling aspect of progressive rock and like tales and like that kind of stuff. But like to me, I've always just been more into like songs that have like content that really kind of speaks more to my experience. So
No, this is interesting because that really holds true for your trio album. I was listening to it and thinking this covers so much ground that I like because you have very catchy hooky things
mm,
that happen, but then you have like really like blasting sonic things happening as well. You have really good rhythmic stuff happening all the time, and then you have soloists that are really interesting soloists used appropriately at the right time.
mm.
Nice to hear that. So, tell me a little bit about writing for this trio because this is a really a different side of you that I don't think I heard when I heard you with District.
Yeah, this was a passion project inspired by the shutdown, and it was essentially just like I did a reunion concert for this. I used to have a quintet, and it was saxophone, trombone, and then keys, bass, drums, and we did some touring, and we were playing kind of like jazz funk kind of stuff. And I just got tired of the grind of trying to book a quintet and the logistics and just playing jazz clubs and playing low paying gigs, and just kind of got tired of that. Being a bass player, I can really just sit around and wait for the phone to ring because everybody needs a bass player all the time. So I kind of got lazy with the leader thing, but we did this reunion show because my keyboard player was back in town. He had moved, and I was like, "Hey man, we should just do a show." So I threw it together. I was like, this is all right. This is fun. I forget how enjoyable this was to play original music like this. And a couple weeks later, Tim Lefebvre was in town playing with Wayne Krantz and Keith Carlock, and I was in a trio with a guitarist and a drummer opening up for them. We just did like a random kind of power trio thing. And after our set, I saw Tim, and he was like pointing at me and was like, "Dude, what's that all about?" And was like, "We got to talk." So after a set with Wayne, we just talked and chatted. We got off to just a great conversation and kept in touch when everything shut down. I was like, I'm gonna just keep writing music and keep trying to develop this project, because why should I stop just because we're not going to have anywhere to play? So we started doing remote demos, and then I hit up Tim and was like, "Hey man, I think I want to do this record. Do you want to produce it?" And he was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So we had to wait a little while because things were peaking in Arizona where he's at, and then they were peaking in Chicago, and so we had to kind of just time it right so when he could get out here before he got real big. He's, once things reopened, he's a top call touring bass player, so it's like he got real busy again. So we just hit a window where it worked out for everybody and went into the studio for 2 days, recorded all the bass tracks, the drum tracks, and like kind of the Rhodes and live keyboard stuff, and then just did a lot of overdubs, flew the tracks out to the guest soloists, to Donnie and then to Fareed and Howard. But this music is really just kind of, it comes from a place of me trying to blur the traditional roles of what a bass player can and has to be. This project originally was a duo. It was just Jonathan and I, and I was having a great time just playing with layers and pedals and looping and doing all sorts of stuff sonically. But I was like, I really need, I need kind of need like one more instrument to sort of fill this out. So we did some gigs with a friend of ours, Rich, who's a saxophone player. And it was fun because then I could just kind of play harmonically and bass wise. But when I'd go to solo, I kind of just missed having an undercurrent. So I remember asking Andrew, like, hey, man, I think I want to do this. Like, would you be down to do it? And he was like, absolutely. And it came together really odd because we were playing this music. We were doing remote demos, not even in the same room. And then when we started playing, it was literally like the fall of 2020. We were just playing on Jonathan's porch. So we would just set up our gear on his porch and just play these crazy fusion tunes, essentially rehearsals. And his neighbors started coming out and like listening, and we're like, this is really cool. When are you guys going to do this again? And I'm like, I can't believe these people like this crazy stuff. And then we started doing live streams because, you know, that was the only other thing to do in the winter.
Right.
And all these people were like checking out the live streams and giving us positive feedback and tipping and kind of like keeping the thing going. So yeah, it's really just, it's been a crazy like year and change since we recorded it. But I'm super excited for the release. It's this Thursday, and really excited to get the music out and like get everyone get a chance to hear this stuff. So
May 19th
yeah.
is the release date. And what's the name of the album, Tim?
The name of the album is It's Just Okay. And it's an old joke that Jonathan and I have had, and I guess other people have this too. I was unaware that this is a widespread thing here, but it was kind of like when it originated when like you'd go see a band play and someone would be like, hey man, how was so and so last night? I know you opened up for so and so. And be like, it was just okay. It's like you're not saying that it was bad, but you're also not saying that it was good. Um, and so I think
I'm familiar with musician speak.
yeah, so it's kind of like we were saying it in the studio, and I realized that the guys where we recorded, they're friends of Jonathan's, and they were saying it. Not I didn't even know that it had moved from Jonathan and I lingo to them. So then I was like, oh, it was also just sort of like a commentary on how everything was going in that period of time. So I felt it good to like accurately title it sort of like how we were all feeling. I mean, because it's like we're in the studio and everyone's like, are we going to get COVID? Do we have to wear masks? Like this is while we're tracking, you know, there's this undercurrent of like, is this even a good idea? Like everyone's been vaccinated, but like someone was only vaccinated like 3 days ago. And so, it was just like, it's kind of, and the cover is also kind of reflective of the title. It just all kind of the brand just kind of came together, and I'm like, this is definitely what it needs to be called. So
Yeah, I think we also use that for food. How was
yeah,
the food? It's just okay.
it's okay, just okay.
It's not terrible. It's not
No,
great. But that's a fun title. And so are you releasing this in physical form? Is it just going to be download? What is it?
right now it's just going to be available digitally, so download and streaming. I do have plans to do a short run of CDs. What I'm probably going to do is do some kind of a Kickstarter and sort of do like a package where if you want a CD, you can donate and that will sort of pre-sell a CD for you. But also I have some like bonus content. I have still have CD copies of past projects that I've done. So I'll do bundles as well, where it'll be the new CD plus like two or three of my older CDs, and then like studio notes, just doing packages where it's like if you want to contribute more, you can get some of the content that we actually use during the studio. And so still in the process of shaping all that out and what that's going to look like, but I'm hoping to get that going sometime this summer. And then hopefully start doing some kind of regional tour dates in the fall and into next year.
And where can people find you online?
I am on Instagram at tslice.shreds. So that's tslice.shreds. And we are TS3 Music on Facebook. And the website, which is still under construction, but there is something there, is ts3shreds.com.
Great. Well, everybody, thank you for listening. My guest has been Tim Seisser, and I'm so pleased that that you're flourishing and doing all this cool music, and I'll be listening to it and be looking for cool stuff from you. So thanks for coming
Awesome.
on and chatting about it.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
My pleasure. All right, folks, see you next time. Please like and subscribe, and we'll keep this going. Thank you.